you're fine and sort of being in the background, stay seated where you're at. As we do each week, we acknowledge that we gather on the land of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. Indigenous nations of the Great Lakes region are known as the Anishinaabe, or original people, and their language is Anishinaabe-Moan. We acknowledge the enduring relationship that exists between the people of the Three Fires and this land. I am reminded that today is the 25th anniversary of the deaths of Maggie Wardle and Ninef Oda. This service that you're about to participate in isn't really a memorial to those young people. It's a search for understanding. It's a witness and a testament to the power of not looking away. For those of us who were on campus here when Maggie and Ninef died, this story has become a part of our lives, and it's important we insist that students hear it year after year so that it can become a part of your lives as well. This reflection is a partnership for sure, but it was primarily driven in its creation using the words of Gail Griffin as she created her book, The Events of October. I am profoundly grateful for Gail, for the many parts of campus that stand in solidarity with us this morning, SPEAK, the Title IX office, the Counseling Center, and of course, Religious and Spiritual Life. Much work has been done to raise awareness about the seriousness of intimate partner violence on this campus, and I believe that Kay is much better off because of it. Today, as you walked in the door, you were handed a warning sheet, warning signs of abusive relationships. If this doesn't seem quite relevant to you right now, that's okay. I hope you will hang on to that sheet. Every year, the sheet finds its way back to my office from a student who's tucked it into a folder or a backpack, and one day it does become relevant. It does seem important, and someone shows up at my office or at the counseling center and says, hey, I was reading this, and it made me think about this relationship that I'm in, or a relationship I see my friend in. So save it. If something you hear or experience today rings a chord with you, please know that you can come to my office, which is in the basement of Stetson Chapel, at any time to come talk about that, or of course to the counseling center. Or you can turn to a trusted RA. You are not alone. Thank you for coming this morning. At the end of today's service, please stay seated and wait for me as I lead Martha and Rick O'Million, Maggie Wardle's parents. We will leave the sanctuary and walk out to Maggie's bench, which is right here on the side of Stetson, and I hope that you will come with us, follow after us. We'll gather there for some last words and a prayer, and I promise we'll get you to class on time. With that, I will turn the service over to Abby.
On Saturday of homecoming weekend in 1999, Maggie Wardle, a sophomore from Plainwell, about 10 miles north of Kalamazoo, played her worst golf game ever, but she laughed about it with the team in the van on the way back to campus. That night, she went to the homecoming dance with a guy she had wanted to date for a while. Her ex-boyfriend, Ninef Oda, a junior from Seattle, saw them together and became enraged and distraught. Maggie spent the next day studying for a test. She planned to watch a movie with friends that night, but wound up studying in her room in Trowbridge. Ninef's friends saw him at dinner and said he seemed fine. They knew he'd been very depressed over the breakup with Maggie, but he told them she was coming over later to his room in DeWaters. It was around midnight when the students in DeWaters heard the noises. They thought it was books falling off a desk, or a computer crashing to the floor. They thought someone was hammering or pounding a wall. They thought it was anything but what it was. As one of them later said, "This is Kay, so that couldn't be a gun." But it was a gun, a shotgun, firing 3 times. The first 2 shots blew Maggie Wardle out of a life filled with love and promise and anticipation. With the third, Ninif Oda ended the misery in which he'd been drowning for years.
What does this story mean within the larger story of Kalamazoo College? What does it mean for our individual lives so many years later? The only way to redeem a terrible event is to learn from it. What can be learned from the deaths of Maggie Wardle and Ninif Oda? The answer lies within another question. How did their relationship get to the point where those gunshots exploded in the midnight air? If we can answer that, perhaps we can prevent this from ever happening again. Today we will share stories of intimate partner violence and the effect that that violence has had on this community. Intimate partner violence describes physical, sexual, or psychological harm by a current or a former partner. This type of violence can occur among heterosexual or same-sex couples and does not require sexual intimacy. People of all identities can be perpetrators of this sort of violence. We tend to think of violence as something that is physical, and it often is. We tell the story of Maggie's life here on campus to remember that physical violence does happen, even here, even at K. Intimate partner violence can take other forms as well. It can be sexual, coercive, or physical assault. It can be emotional or psychological violence perpetrated by one person against another. And it can be the threat of physical or sexual violence, which is its own form of violence.
Each year, we tell the story of the lives of Maggie Wardle and Ninif Oda because they were one of us, students here at K College. Their story illustrates just how mundane intimate partner violence can look from the outside and how dangerous it is to those who are living on the inside. It is an important story for you to know and carry with you. Violence is found in straight relationships and in same-sex ones, in long-term relationships and in newly beginning ones. As we tell Maggie and Ninif's story, you'll also hear additional information on how to support your friends should someone disclose a violent experience, where to turn for help if you need it, and a vision of what thriving after an experience of violence can look like. You will need all this information because you live here, at K College, in the real world where violence exists. It can be easy to imagine that violence is far away, dramatic, or outside our experience. But students regularly admit to having a friend involved in a relationship they don't think is safe. Sometimes they are worried about their own relationships. This isn't a problem for other people and other places. This is our reality here at K College. Today, as we hear stories and warning signs, I hope you'll allow this to sink into your consciousness. If these stories become a part of your story, K College will be a better place. Thank you for coming.
When we think of partner violence, how do we imagine the perpetrator? Possibly as a big guy, macho, dominant, sexist in his views towards women. Ninif Oda was 5'9", 140 pounds, and a small build. The word used most often to describe him was quiet. He was a computer science major who loved gaming. His closest friends were women, drawn to him by his gentleness, sly sense of humor, and love for the women in his family. If the perpetrator has a Middle Eastern name, we might conclude that his religion or culture drove him to violence. In fact, Ninif emigrated from Iraq with his family when he was about 12. They belonged to the ethnic group named Assyrians, sometimes as Chaldeans. The Assyrians, a persecuted ethnic group in Iraq, were among the earliest Christians, and in this country, they mostly attend Roman Catholic churches. Nineve did tell friends that in his family and culture, women were subordinated. It was hard for him to ride in a car with a woman driving, for instance. But he was also aware that this bias was at odds with the culture most of his friends were coming from. Nineve danced in Freelon. He played soccer up and down the hall in the waters. He had friends across gender, racial, ethnic, and religious boundaries. He was one of us. And this was the hard part. How could one of us, a person with many lovable and admirable qualities, commit such a terrible crime? To answer that question, we have to abandon our stereotypes and look instead at actions. It's in actions, not types of people that we can recognize the warnings that can keep us safe.
Did you know that a victim survivor typically first discloses their experiences to friends or family members? Experiences of intimate partner violence can bring up feelings of shame and embarrassment, or even fear of a negative reaction from those they tell. If you are supporting a loved one in an abusive relationship, take time to listen and offer support. Validate their feelings using phrases like, "What you're going through is difficult." Do not judge a survivor's choices, because intimate partner violence often leaves a person feeling powerless. Empower your loved one by placing control back in their hands. You are there to lend a listening ear, offer a comforting presence, and be a support for whatever choices they make. Most importantly, when someone discloses an experience of intimate partner violence, believe them.
Current research tells us that the most significant warning sign for violence against women is male jealousy. Not the jealousy any of us might normally feel about a partner, but the jealousy that demands control of that person's actions. From the first, Nineve objected to Maggie's hanging out with anyone but him, male or female. He wanted her to himself. He worked to separate her from the female friends of whom he disapproved. In order to hang out with them, she would leave the dorm bundled up so as not to be recognized, use cologne and mouthwash to hide the fact that she had been smoking, which Nineve prohibited, and even tell him she was going home to Plainwell for the night in order to go out with her friends. A second warning sign is past violence. As far as we know, Nineve never hit Maggie, but he was constantly threatening or fighting with other men or bragging about past fights. When a woman he had dated 3 times ended the relationship, he put his fist through a window. After a fight with Maggie, he punched through a closet door in his room.
But the past violence that is a warning sign can also be violence the perpetrator himself has experienced as a victim. In fact, violence suffered or witnessed in childhood is one of the most reliable predictors of adult violence amongst men. Nineve told friends that his father physically abused his mother and that Nineve himself was beaten when he brought home unacceptable grades. And Nineve wasn't doing well at K, and his father kept issuing ultimatums, including a prohibition on dating. Meanwhile, over the summer, Maggie had moved out of the relationship and started dating other people. Friends told Nineve to accept it and move on. He refused. It must have seemed to him that his life was collapsing around him. On October 9th, 1999, he borrowed his roommate's car, drove to a gun store, and bought a 12-gauge shotgun and ammo, which he then hid under his bed for 9 days. Whether at that point he was planning to kill only himself or to take Maggie with him, we will never know. But what about Maggie? Why did she put up with a relationship like this? Didn't she know she was in danger? How do we usually imagine the victim of partner violence? Why does she stay? This is a frequently asked question, but it is the wrong question. Unfortunately, when people attempt to understand domestic violence, they often start by scrutinizing and evaluating the survivor. This practice avoids looking at the behavior and intentions of the perpetrator of violence, and it fails to hold the perpetrator accountable for their actions. It also misses the essential task of examining the ways in which our culture condones, supports, and gives permission for battering. In our victim-blaming society, we assume that it is the victim's responsibility to not get victimized, rather than the perpetrator's responsibility to not use violence.
But what about Maggie? Why did she put up with a relationship like this? Didn't she know she was in danger? The answer is that she did not put up with it. By August, she had made clear that she was done. In Nina's failure to accept her decision, a common pattern appears. The greatest danger for a woman is in the period just before, during, and after she has left a dangerous man. The rates of violence, including murder, skyrocket at that time because it is her termination of the relationship, implying her right to a life apart from him, that triggers his desperation and rage.
How do we usually imagine the victim of partner violence? As weak, dependent, pitiful, and not too bright. Maggie Wardle was anything but. She was strong, athletic, opinionated, snarky, funny, outgoing, and very smart. She came to K trailing awards and prizes. She planned to study abroad in Germany, where she had family, and go on to law school. A professor in her major saw her as a true academic star in the making. Above all, Maggie was compassionate. She made friends easily, kept friends faithfully, and was one of those people who are there for you. Everybody with problems came to Maggie. It may be her compassion and empathy that kept her connected enough to Neneth, sorry enough for his suffering, to endure his verbal abuse, and to go to his room the night of October 18th, when he asked her to come over and read something. She told her roommate she'd be gone 10 minutes.
Every year in the US, over 1,000 women are killed by intimate partners. That category includes boyfriends, husbands, and exes. The perpetrator kills himself around 20% of the time. Among murder-suicides, 74% involve intimate partners or exes, and of these, well over 90% involve female victims and male perpetrators. The scenario is virtually always the same. In the words of a report from the U.S. Violence Policy Center, he typically develops suspicions of his girlfriend's or wife's infidelity, becomes enraged, murders her, and then commits suicide. So while those shotgun blasts seem extraordinary on our campus, what happened that night followed a very typical pattern. It's hard to talk about that pattern without seeming to say that men are the enemy, or that all men are abusers. And all men are certainly not. But women's lives are shaped from childhood by the danger of male violence. Femicide, the killing of women, is only the far end of the spectrum of violence that is part of millions and millions of women's lives. The spectrum includes media images, sexist language, harassment at school or on the job or on the street, pornography, sexual assault, incest, and the fear that every woman has felt at some time in a parking garage or a dark hallway, or on a date. But statistically, the very most dangerous place a woman can be is in her own place of residence. Because statistically, the person most likely to harm her lives there, used to live there, or has easy access.
On college campuses, the small, tight-knit environment poses its own challenges. Everyone knows everyone. We know that 60% of acquaintance rapes on campus occur in casual or steady dating relationships. Nearly 1/3 of college students report having physically assaulted a dating partner in the previous 12 months. As many as 1/4 of female students experience sexual assault over the course of their college careers, and approximately 90% of victims of sexual assault on college campuses know their attacker. Sometimes college students end up feeling trapped by their social networks and the bubble of their college campus. Students may fear parents pulling them out of school if they find out. They might fear administrators who won't take them seriously. And sometimes, students fear the assailant.
A closed campus environment can make it easier for an assailant to stalk his or her partner.
What could have prevented the gunshots into Waters? A number of things. We could make guns much less readily available in our society. We could also work toward a culture in which boys would be socialized differently, not constantly encouraged to embrace violence, deny difficult feelings, and prove themselves real men by dissing, objectifying, and controlling women. This system damages them as well as the women they hurt. After all, it killed Nenef as surely as it killed Maggie. We could work toward a culture which doesn't send girls crazy making conflicting messages like be strong and independent, but also be hot and sexually available. Be assertive, but don't be bitchy. And above all, make sure you're always in a relationship, no matter how empty or hurtful or frightening that relationship gets. Another possible answer to the question lies in the idea of community. Many people had heard Maggie and Nenef fighting, heard about his verbal abuse, knew he was depressed, even thought he was dangerous. He actually told one person that he'd felt suicidal and had tried to buy a gun over the summer. The people who were worried about Maggie or Nenef were other students, and yet nobody went to an RA or a dean of students or a college counselor or a faculty member and said, I'm worried, I think Maggie's in trouble, or I'm scared, I think Nenef's suicidal.
Too often, in small communities, a code of silence allows us to keep each other's secrets, ignore each other's danger, and do it all in the name of respecting individual privacy. But community at its best means interdependence. We support and help each other. So community involves responsibilities. If we hear verbal violence, we don't call it normal. We investigate and call for help. If we know a woman who's afraid of her boyfriend, we don't leave it up to her to get fed up with it, or leave it up to him to get a grip. If a friend is leaving a relationship that might be dangerous, we form a support system and call for help. If we know someone's severely depressed or talking about suicide, we tell someone. We ask for help. Above all, we call on the resources of this community to help us.
We have the ability to improve our campus culture. All we have to do is work together to create a culture of trust, support, and equity. This means attending events that support victims and survivors and sharing resources. Here at K, supportive services including the Counseling Center, the Office of Wellness and Care, Chaplain Liz in Religious and Spiritual Life, and the Title IX office. Off-campus resources include the YWCA, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, or One Love. Change begins with your discussions and about the importance of consent and respect in all relationships, but especially in romantic relationships. Change begins with this, awareness. It starts with us.
You know, Kalamazoo College, we can do this, and we can do this well. If we work together to create a culture, the culture that we want, if we stand up for one another and speak out when we hear or we see something, we offer the possibility for survivors of violence to thrive. What does thriving look like? If you have been a victim of relationship violence, thriving could be sharing your story with others and creating community with other survivors. Thriving means having control over your life. It means making choices for yourself about the relationships you have, the actions you take, the care you give yourself. Thriving isn't one thing. Some days it just looks like getting out of bed. Other days it might be going to work or school and maintaining a normal routine. It means the slow transition between questioning relationship behaviors to someday learning to trust a partner who exhibits healthy conflict resolution and emotional management. Thriving means building a new relationship with yourself, one of love, compassion, and understanding. Thriving after an abusive relationship changes day to day, year to year, and it looks different for everyone. Thriving is our goal. For survivors of violence, for all of us. I'd like to invite Jessica from the YWCA to come up.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to this impactful event and for keeping Maggie's memory alive. I am the Vice President of Victim Services at YWCA Kalamazoo, where I oversee all of our comprehensive services for survivors. We have a full-service law firm at the YWCA that provides both emergency and ongoing legal services support, including Title IX advocacy. We have a full clinical program of therapists, we have advocates, and we have an emergency shelter and other sheltering options. We have provided services to K students, I'm sure, for as long as we have had a program for the last 50 years serving survivors, and we have served their families when they have experienced this horrific violence. I think there's a lot of truth in having both the support and awareness of a community like K, and that it is insular. And there are times that you're going to need to step outside of this community, and please know that we are here for you. And we have many opportunities to get involved, not just in seeking services, but also to continue your advocacy and your awareness raising and the work that you hopefully are inspired to do upon leaving today. I wanted to say too that I and my career since coming to Kalamazoo has been profoundly impacted by Maggie. And when I first came to the city about 8 years ago, I first came because my partner is a faculty member here, and we lived in faculty housing. And it was shortly before I began in my position and started a legal services program at the YWCA. She has been a constant presence in my life and in our services. And her memory has certainly been a blessing, but it's been a call to action. And I think we heard that today, and the profound work that her parents have continued to do in Kalamazoo and across the state and this country. And her life and her death have had such profound collateral consequences, but also, I think, have prevented others from experiencing the same. And I wanted to make sure that that did not go unsaid. Because although this is not a memorial service, it does mark the 25th anniversary of her death. So thank you for having me. Thank you for continuing this in her memory, and may we all learn from her life and from her murder. And please reach out if this is something that calls to you, if you need our services, but also if you'd like to get more involved. There is a lot of really important work happening that is being led in so many ways by Rick and Martha. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for being with us here today. This story, the story of Maggie and Enif, is your story now. In the days and in the years to come, perhaps you'll think of them. They were a part of our community, part of all of us. If we want to live together in a respectful and compassionate community as a college, as a nation, in our world, then this story must be a part of all of ours. Please allow me to walk out first with Martha and Rick, and then please join us at Maggie's bench right out here.